So to recap where we're at, we all got issues. Everybody's got some issues. Some of us have more severe issues than others at various times in our lives, and there's stuff we can do about it to help out. About half of us would meet criteria for psychological disorder as defined by the DSM-5, or as this data was taken, DSM-4-TR, over some point in our lifetime. Doesn't mean we're going to get diagnosed, because most of us won't seek treatment, but seeking treatment is something we can consider, and hopefully something we can knock down the stigma, because that seems to be what prevents most people from seeking out treatment. Very few people get adequate treatment. Here are various therapies we're going to talk about for your consideration. I would say this though, seeking out help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. To humble yourself and think you ain't got this, but somebody can help you get this, is not a bad thing. Advice doesn't work on the whole. There's no shortage of advice in our lives. You need some advice, I guarantee you can get some right now, right here, inside of 5 seconds. If advice worked, everybody'd be happy. Everybody'd be living a life they were proud of, because there's no shortage thereof. Right? So seeking out therapists, I liken that to a coach. Some people think, oh, I'm not crazy. And I'll give you an example. I had a woman I met with in the doctor's office, because I work down at the doctor's office. That's what primary care psychology is putting psychologists where people actually go to get their mental health care. They don't go to the mental health centers, they go to their doctor. But the doctor has a limited slate of options, but I happened to be there, and they asked me to come in and see this woman who was having a really, really hard time. I won't go into the details, but life had hit the fan for her. She was at this point homeless, jobless, with 2 kids, no support systems, and she was upset, understandably so. And I talked to her, and it turns out she had long-standing anxiety issues, long-standing depression issues. And she said, people have been telling me I should go to Watauga Mental Health for years, but I ain't crazy. I said, I don't think that you're crazy. It sounds to me that you're under a lot of stress, a lot of difficulties that are hard to overcome, and that that's being even more stressful because you're already depressed and anxious. And I'd like to talk to you, if you're cool with that, about some ideas, some techniques, some strategies you might use to kind of help take care of this depression and develop some approaches to dealing with these life difficulties. How does that sound? She said, that sounds real good. I'm like, would you be cool with meeting again? She said, yeah, I think I would. Now, what's interesting to me about that is exactly the same conversation I would have had with this woman had I worked at Watauga Mental Health Center. Right? But I didn't at the time. I worked in a doctor's office. She didn't go to the mental health center for help. She went to the doctor's office because she thought going to the mental health center made her crazy. And that if anybody suggested that she go to such a place, they were basically putting her down. Right? And she saw herself as resilient. She saw herself as dedicated to her kids. She saw herself with all these positives, but up against a bunch of negative situations. And so all I did was have conversation with her. I never made anybody better as a therapist in my life. I've never worked magic on anybody. No therapist does. No counselor can. At your best, all you're doing is providing a space in which a person works on themselves, where you're the tool they're using. They're giving you information because you're trained to ask certain questions and think about things in certain ways and give them feedback and give them suggestions that they might then apply for themselves. That's very much what a coach does, is it not? You look at coaches on sports teams, and some of them look like they could never play that sport that they're coaching because they don't have to. Do your therapists and counselors got problems? Hell yes, they do. Do they got hang-ups and problems and eccentricities? Yes. Do they got issues? Yes. Their job in that situation is not to be a perfect person. It's to be a neutral person. Be trained to leave their stuff at the door and help you focus on your stuff. So the coach may not be able to play the game anymore, but the coach's job isn't to play the game. It's to observe the athletes with a set of knowledge, give them feedback. And if there's a good relationship between the coach and the athletes, that athlete might choose to use that feedback to improve their own game. Coach never made an athlete better any more than a therapist made somebody better. It's about using some space to work on yourself, but you have to have the motivation to do that. You have to cast aside the stigma from that. And if you have a bad experience with it, don't assume that that anecdotal experience predicts all the future possible experiences you might have. I look at therapy like plumbing, right? Some people have a bad therapy experience. You're like, man, therapy is bullshit. I ain't never going back to that. I have people crazy. I'm not talking to them. But if you had a bad plumbing experience, you go, man, plumbing's bullshit. I ain't never getting a plumber again. Hell with plumbing. That's stupid. Right? What do?
Do it yourself.
No, not me. I hate plumbing and electricity. I do a lot of things, but I'm going to get an expert when it comes down to something that could destroy my house if I get it wrong. If I don't get a good plumber the first time, I get another one. I go and get another plumber, right? And if I don't like what happens with that one, I would do what? Get another one, right? Therapists are like people. Plumbers are like people. You got a normal distribution with everything, right? In any profession, you're going to have some people that are going to excel, and you're going to have some people that suck. Most people are going to be toward the average, and they're going to lean one way or the other. And when you're talking about interpersonally jiving with somebody, you really got to take your time to invest in finding the right person for you, making sure they have the training, making sure they have the credentialing, making sure they have the licensure, making sure they have the insurance, making sure that they hear you, right? And if you do that, you're likely to have a good experience if you come with a motivation, because it turns out therapy works because people who engage in it make it work. There's a bunch of different ones. Let's talk about the biological therapies. These are the most commonly used. They reduce the symptoms of disorders by altering the way in which an individual's body functions. So we're talking about, with drugs being the most common type of therapy, we're talking about the alteration of neurotransmitters, right? We see that some kinds of neurotransmitters, GABA with anxiety, serotonin, norepinephrine, the monoamines with depression, seem to be related to these disorders, and that modifying the amounts of those neurotransmitters through the use of pharmacological interventions seems to be associated with symptom improvement. And that is a fact. There's no denying that. And never get me wrong, I'm not anti-drugs. I am. Be very careful about your diagnoses. Make sure you're using all appropriate treatments to take care of stuff. In our society, and probably the world over, people don't really want to invest themselves in doing a lot of work on themselves to improve their lives. Makes sense. They say, if you've got something for that, and it makes me feel better, why wouldn't I take just that, hoping that it would solve my problem? And sometimes it does, or at least abates the problem enough that people get by, and that's fine. But it doesn't eliminate the cause of the problem. Whatever caused the problem is not likely to be alleviated through the use of medications. We already talked extensively about the issues with anxiety and medications, where you wind up oftentimes with tolerance building up to the anxiolytic drugs until you get up to levels that now you have dependence on the drugs, but you never abated the anxiety at its core. So now you got two problems instead of just one.